better Wi-Fi. So there we go. We are live. C.S. Lewis, Screwtape Letters. All right. So I handed out some things as we get going. Now, one of the things I want to say up front, I was asked a couple times today. We're not actually going to get into the letters because we're all kind of new here coming to this night. And so kind of want to set the stage, if that makes sense. So we'll take a big meta level look, a little bit at what Lewis was doing, what was some of the motivation. There's a wonderful, wonderful website that I strongly encourage if you're a C.S. Lewis fan. There's no shortage of resources on Lewis, but this comes right from the C.S. Lewis Institute. So in other words, what I have handed out, the study questions for the book, comes from the C.S. Lewis study program, the U.S. version, the official U.S. version in Virginia. So this is basically the horse's mouth, as they say. This is the estate. As you know, Joy Davidson, his wife, and she was an American. And anyway, this resource is amazing. So you not only for Screwtape Letters, but The Great Divorce, Mere Christianity. You could actually go on YouTube and see, 6-part series and whatnot. Dr. John Root, who's a professor at Wheaton and is a Lewis scholar, he actually has a 6-part series on the Screwtape Letters. He doesn't get into the granularities of the letters, but he does kind of look at it from the 50,000-foot view. So for example, lecture 1 is, why did he write the letter? What was his motivation behind it? What was going through his mind? So the study guide that I will follow for the 31 letters is basically from here. Does that make sense? Because I figure for us to get the most out of it, it might behoove us to go to the source that helped create the book and the people that work for the estate. So anyway, so you could see that there's lots of wonderful questions in there, and then at the end, okay, they really put together a nice little chart. You can see the last page. So it's not necessarily about the book itself, but some of the chapter themes and some of the strategies of the demon and how the devils work, and then of course the divine strategies. How do we fight? So it kind of gives us a nice little game plan. I think it's worth keep bringing it every week. That's going to be our source material. All right. There's 31 letters, and so the way I look at it, if we took one letter a week, that would take us 31 weeks. We probably don't want to take 31 weeks. So if we take 2 letters a week, that gets us to about 15 weeks, which means by the time end of January rolls around, we can get into something else for Lent, a Lenten book. I've done one other book club, and that was a book for Lent about 9 years ago. If you've ever seen it, A Death on a Friday Afternoon. Have you ever heard of that book? Father Richard John Newhouse. Have you read it? It's fantastic. 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 No, but it's anything by Newhouse. He could write about, the dog races at, down in Florida or whatever. It'd be like, man, that's fantastic. He's such a great writer. But anyway, so that's kind of the approach that we're going to take. So, all right. So let's all look at the introduction that I handed out. So, originally published in The Guardian. Oh, how the gold has become dim with The Guardian. I don't think they'd be publishing him today. From May 2nd to November 28th, 1941. So in many ways, this becomes really his book that puts him on the map in many ways, at least in Christian circles. Lewis conceived of the Screwtape Letters in the summer of 1940. On the evening of July 20th, he heard his broadcast speech by Hitler and later wrote to his brother, warning, "I don't know if I am weaker than other people, but it is a positive revelation to me that while the speech lasts, it is impossible not to waver just a little." Lewis went on to explain that he was struck by an idea for a book, which I think would be both useful and entertaining. It would be called As One Devil to Another. That was the original, at least from that working title, and would consist of letters from an elderly retired devil to a young devil who has just started work on his first patient. The idea would be to give all the psychology of temptation from the other point of view. And of course, that's kind of the hardest part about the book, that when he's talking about like our Father, it's like, wait, he's not talking about our God. He's talking about the bad guy. Okay. So this idea would be to give all the psychology of temptation from the other point of view. This reversal, whereby God becomes the enemy and our Father's house is not heaven but hell, is crucial to understanding the Screwtape Letters and also accounts for much of its power. All questions of Christian faith are approached from the perspective of a devil who wants to undermine that faith and capture the soul of the patient. This radical shift allows Lewis to reveal, as the patient moves precariously through one temptation after another, both what is required to maintain one's virtue and the precise nature of the forces of darkness deployed to destroy it. The Screwtape Letters was greeted with great critical and popular enthusiasm when it first appeared. The book was reprinted 8 times in 1942 alone. That's incredible. No Amazon, no mass marketing campaign, really word of mouth. Hey, you got to read this. Contemporary reviewers wrote that, quote, Lewis is in earnest with his belief in devils and is anxious to unmask their strategy against souls as our intelligence department to detect the designs of Hitler. And that Mr. Lewis possesses the rare gift of being able to make righteousness readable. The Saturday Review called it an admirable, diverting, and remarkably original work, a spectacular and satisfactory nova in the bleak sky of satire. And of course, even down to this day, the mere fact that people still read the book with great profit. I was talking to somebody today who actually started reading the book last night, and she said, it was Katie, I feel as if he could have written this book last week. And I think that's, I mean, there are some authors, if we're honest, Chuck, you and I talk about Sheen all the time. There are some authors who are always contemporary. And Carl, you've read with profit almost every one of his works, if not all of them, right?
No.
Right. Right. You know, just incredible. Incredible. So we got the introduction. So the character Wormwood, did you know that that's a biblical word? It's the wormwood, yeah. And it's a play on the word in Hebrew. Excuse me, allergies. Mara, which if you know your book of Ruth, right? Naomi means sweetness. And when she comes back and goes home to the people, right, to her family, to the household of Elimelech, they say, oh, is this Naomi? And what does Naomi say? Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Lord has made my life bitter. Or some translations, the Lord has gone to war with me and I've lost, right? Who can contend when the Lord fights with you? And of course, in the Old Testament, right, the people grumbled, right? Moses, the water became bitter, right? So the wormwood is from the Artemis plant, and the extraction makes everything bitter. And so that's the wormwood. And so it's used 8 times in the Old Testament and 1 time in the book of Revelation, Revelation 8:10 through 11, where We just put this up right here, the wonders of our technology, that I could just do this real quick. Revelation 8, RSVCE. It's going to pop right up. There it is. Like, I don't even have my Bible on me. I shouldn't report that. I'm a Catholic, right? It was, oh, you don't have his Bible. We do Bible study on Tuesdays. Hey. So the third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the fountains of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many died of the water because it was made bitter. So Lewis definitely would have been aware of the fact that the wormwood makes things bitter. And so there's the nephew demon Wormwood. Good choice of a name, probably, right? Because if the devil gets too much of a hold in our lives, what becomes of our life? We become bitter, right? We become bitter. We become embittered, right? As my friend used to always say, the devil always promises blessing, but in the end, all he can do is curse. It's all he can do. He can't do he can't bless. But we get deceived, right? We'll see that in the letter. So anyway, anybody thoughts, comments, observations about that introduction, which I got off the C.S. Lewis website, not in America, but in England. So there we go. There's multiple C.S. Lewis websites that are approved websites of the estate. So.
Wormwood is where the term vermouth comes from. Wormwood is vermouth.
Look at that. Vermouth, the drink.
Right.
Look.
That's where the vermouth comes from.
Wow. Nice. It was Manhattan, right? You put that in a Manhattan? Martini. Look at that. We should have martinis in honor of that.
We can get nothing done.
Couple of olives. Father Driscoll can make us a nice martini. I shouldn't say that on the Father Driscoll, I'm only kidding. All right, so anyway, well, we're Catholic. We imbibe. So anyway, real quick, Lewis, of course, there's a wonderful Journey Home. If you know Journey Home, EWTN, Marcus Grodi, from about probably 12 years ago or whatever, 15 years ago. Yes, Father Andrew Jones was on that. In fact, I could probably actually find out right now when it was on. So Walter Hooper was an American, and Lewis, like a man of his time, correspondence, not text, not, correspondence, got letters. A young man, Walter Hooper, an American, much like eventually Lewis's wife, right, wrote him a letter. And much to the surprise of young Walter, C.S. Lewis wrote him back and said, hey, if you're ever in England, come and visit. And we'll do tea. That's a bygone era. We don't see that anymore. People call us. We're like, who's calling me? Right? That's how we act. Right? There's a great comedian. I can't remember his name. Funny. When you back in the 70s or whatever, I can remember the Jamesons knocked on the door. You let them in, and you had Entenmann's cake and coffee. Now somebody knocks on the door. Everybody's hiding. We're getting under the desk. Like, what? Who is knocking on my door right now? No one should be knocking on, right? That's how we are, right? Our culture has changed. It's a different world. Who's that Italian? Who's the guy from Chicago who does that whole skit? He plays it all out. You remember watching it? Everybody's hiding. You go, you shut the light over there. Don't let them see you. It's like, it's the kind of thing, it's the kind of world that we live in. But back in Lewis's day, right? You wrote letters and, hey, if we're in town, we get together. So this Walter Hooper, he became the editor eventually of many of the books. Yes, that's what I thought. He was from North Carolina. He recently died just in 2020. He was born 1931. And so he wrote Lewis. And anyway, they struck up a correspondence and a friendship. And Walter Hooper became a Christian because of C.S. Lewis. And then subsequent, there it is, November 19th, 2014, Walter Hooper was on the journey home. Okay. So, yes. So, anyway, Walter Hooper became friends with Lewis, and Lewis entrusted the young student, who was a scholar in his own right, a budding scholar, and said, hey, I want to make you the trustee of the estate. I want to put you in charge of that. You will take care of, so he kind of became like Lewis's assistant. Think in terms of a TA, somebody, but more elevated. Like it wasn't just like a college job. It was somebody, this is what he did. And so anyway, long story short, Walter Hooper, Anglican, went to church and all that kind of stuff. Lewis dies, right? 1963. And then, of course, now he becomes really important. I mean, he's the guy with the family, with Joy's children, the movies that were made. He played a role in all of like selling the rights and all that kind of stuff, right? But his job was to be faithful to C.S. Lewis. Like the Tolkien estate was faithful, okay, with the original ones, but what they did recently with Amazon is a disgrace. Mm-hmm. It's just a cash. It's a money grab, right? Because there's no Tolkien's really left, other than whatever. So it's just a cash grab. Whereas Hooper was, they're being faithful to Lewis. Like you're going to be faithful to what he did, right? You're not going to take it into a whole new direction. So anyway, Hooper sees the trajectory of the Anglican Church, and he, of course, becomes a Catholic. And so he was interviewed by Marcus Grodi, and of course, the $1 million question is, Lewis was such an amazing writer. You read him, he believes in purgatory, he believes in the books of the Bible that we believe in, he believes in the 7 sacraments. My gosh, the man was a Catholic. What happened? And Hooper said, you're right. He basically was a material Catholic. He was not a formal Catholic, but he was a material Catholic. And some of you may have heard this. Being that he was from Belfast, and we had a priest here, Father McKenna, who will tell you, right, who would have told you probably the same thing. Northern Ireland, the Catholic issue, the Protestant issue is real. It runs deep. That would be a hard hurdle to overcome. It wouldn't be something that one overcomes easily. But he does believe that he does say that if C.S. Lewis had lived to see the trajectory of the Anglican Church, he says, I have no doubt that the man would have made the move to become Catholic. Because I have no doubt about that. But he tells the story in that interview about St. John Paul II. So Walter Hooper had an audience with John Paul. And so, of course, it was tied to C.S. Lewis. And so he said to him, what was it like? John Paul was like, what was it like being around him? And John Paul shared about how much he enjoyed and how he read Lewis with great profit and enjoyed reading him and felt that he was, just a great apologist for his day and how his work has stood the test of time. And John Paul said to Hooper, what Hooper said was, he lived his vocation well. He knew what his work was to do. He lived his vocation well. And, when you think about that, really, that's the ultimate compliment that could be paid to any one of us, isn't it? If you're a mother, she lived her vocation well. If you're a priest, he lived his vocation well. Whatever it is, whatever our task is, whatever our work is, ultimately to become a saint. And so that was said of Lewis. So anyway, I'll send that out on the recap so you could watch that if you are interested. Give a little bit of background about Lewis and his, interactions with Catholicism. So, all right. Any thoughts, comments, observations? Think about. Does that sound like a good plan to do 2 letters a week, or is that too ambitious? Yeah, I'm all right. So before we get into the letters themselves, and we get into the letters, it would behoove us, I think, to think about the enemy, at least from the perspective of who is, if you will, because Lewis would not want us to. It is somewhat comical. The letters are comical in how they work, and in many ways, I think it's true. You may have heard the stories of Saint John Vianney, right? Saint John Vianney, he hears this noise, this ruckus against his window. What's going on? Who's waking me up? And he wakes up, and apparently the devil shows up, and John looks at him and says, "Oh, it's only you. I'm going back to bed." Right? He is John Vianney. He's a really holy saint, possessed truly by God in all ways. I have a feeling none of us would have reacted that way. I suspect I would not have. I would have been like, "Oh my gosh, what is going on here? Please, I go to adoration sometimes and I think to myself, please no apparitions. I like my job. I like my life. Because it's true. Like people who have apparitions, like they're dead in like 3 years, like Saint Bernadette, they have something cataclysmic happen. Don't need that. Don't need that drama in my life. Archbishop Brody, I knew this man was nuts. What's going on here? Right? We don't need that. Anyway, our enemy's real, and the names, we all know about names in the Bible and how names correspond to a truth, right? So Abraham was Avram or Abram. So that means like chief father. And then when he's told, look, no, you're like going to become the father of this like number that you can't even count. In fact, I'm going to change your name. You're no longer Avram. You are now Abraham. You're now the father of many. Count the stars in the sky. Abraham's like, sleepy, right? So the name gets changed. Sarai to Sarah. Sarai is the singular. Sarah is the plural. She becomes the mother of many, right? So names have meaning. Well, guess what? Names have meaning for the devil. And so there are 3 basic names of the devil in the Bible, right? And so the first one that we look at is Lucifer. You've heard that one. That sounds very ominous, doesn't it? Doesn't Lucifer sound ominous? You know what it means? Light bearer, loose, light. And it's interesting. Yeah, I love watching like sports documentaries. My wife will tell you, I don't watch a lot of TV. We'll watch a show together. She usually picks it. I'm bad at picking the shows. I picked a show that I thought was good. By episode 3, we're let down already, right? There's that one show on Apple TV. But I like sports documentaries. And so, anything about Nick Saban or Bill Belichick or Vince Lombardi, Don Shula, right? I'm going to watch it because I just find it fascinating, the psychology of it all. And Bill Belichick, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. Oh, Father Andrew and I were talking about it in reference to the spiritual life. So Father Andrew visited my classes the other day, and it was great, as it always is when he comes. But Bill Belichick in terms of his coaching style. And so if you look at his numbers, like when he had time to prepare to play a team, if he was on a bye week or he had like take the Super Bowl and he had 2 weeks to prepare, he never lost. I mean, he might lose. I mean, he might have had one loss. I mean, he just never lost. And the thing is that they would so study their opponent and especially their weakness. Like what was their Achilles heel? And they would just watch the film over and over again. And so they would develop a game plan that would expose your weakness. That would be like offense to defense or whatever. And then, of course, he would do different things, like he would disguise things. So when they played the Rams in the Super Bowl, the Rams didn't know what was happening. They didn't know what was happening. They were like, wait, they got 3 down linemen. They got 8 defensive backs. They shouldn't be able to stop the run. Why are they stopping the run? Like this should not happen, right? And so the moral there is, right, you know who you're facing. Well, if in the spiritual life we have a real enemy, doesn't it behoove us to know who we're facing, what we're up against? And so the name Lucifer tells us that he's going to make temptation look what? It's appealing. Think back to the first sin and think about how Moses or the author describes the fruit. Good to look at. Able to make one wise. Very beneficial qualities. When you think about every temptation that you face, you could probably come up with 1,000 reasons why it's good for you. And you probably wouldn't be wrong in some way. Kid cheating on a test, right? Kid cheats on a test. Why? For a good reason. There's a lot of good reasons to cheat on a test. It's good to get a good grade. I'd rather have an A. I don't want to get in trouble, right? I mean, you can justify. Think about every embezzler that's ever embezzled probably had 1,000 reasons why they were right to embezzle. I've been looked over for promotions. They don't like me. They keep me down. This is entitled to me. Look at how many hours I've worked and I haven't gotten paid. St. Augustine says that everything we do, even our sin, we do it for a perceived good. Do you think he's right?
Yes, I do.
100%.
100%.
And think about how our mind works, right? With the devil, the mind of the devil, Father Andrew pointed this out the other day, right? They have a higher level of knowledge. So when the devil sins, he knows the effect of it. But when we sin, we don't get it. We don't understand it, right? Because we learn differently. We kind of have to argue backwards, whereas the devil knows a thing in itself. And so it's interesting that, when it comes to how the devil works in terms of temptation, he knows what's going to get us, or at least entice us, right? He knows what to throw our way. And so, and boy, is he really good at convincing us too. And so St. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, if you will, picks up on this image of our adversary, the devil. He says, often appears as an angel of light. And he says that in reference to the super apostles. You want apostles that are glorious and well-spoken and powerful and majestic. And I'm just lowly Paul, who's been, imprisoned and beat and punished. And, right, we're reading 1 Corinthians now. I come with great fear and trembling. I have no lofty words of wisdom. And they actually talk bad. We're going to get there, where they actually talk bad about Paul. They actually write to Paul in correspondence that he references that we don't have. I wish we had, where it says, "Oh, Paul, you sound so tough in your letters, but in person you're weak." They actually say that about him, right? So they want apostles they can be proud of. And so that's the context of Paul saying that your opponent, your enemy, the devil, appears as an angel of light. So temptation often appeals to our senses, right? We talk about the world, the flesh, and the devil. But then his other name is what? Devil. And that word, diabolical. Diabolo. So in Greek, the name of the devil in Greek is diabolo. Dia, which means to cut across, balo, cast. So diabolo, literally diabolical one, is the one who divides. So we translate that into English as divide. He's a divider. So he's one that comes, so he cuts across, and he like what he does, he casts out. It's a fishing term. It's a throwing term. So to cast. So balo, sounds like ball. You throw a ball, right? So diabolo, one who divides, cuts through, something like that, right? He's twisted, he's distorted, right? In fact, it's a play on words. The word for exorcism, guess what? Ex-balo. Diabolo. Ex-balo. So when Jesus is casting out demons, literally, it's a play on words. He's ex-baloing them He's ex-boloing the diabolo. You see the play on words that we don't pick up on that in English, but you pick up on that in Greek. So it's kind of a play on words. And then Satan. Now that name sounds, pretty tough. It's a tough name. But do you know, you know what the name means? Accuser. Satan, the Satan. In Zechariah 3 and Revelation 12, Satan stands accusing the people of God. And so one of my favorite stories, if you are ever feeling down that you've blown it and you're too dirty for God, read Zechariah 3. It's some of the most beautiful language in the Bible. It's the story of Joshua the high priest, and he's standing before God, and standing next to Joshua is Satan and this strange figure that I am confident is Jesus himself, but it's the angel of the Lord. And whenever you read in the Old Testament this figure, the angel of the Lord, when it's capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. Not talking Gabriel here or Michael, we're talking, angel of Yahweh. It always is a kind of a theophany. Does that make sense? Like, I just saw God. I'm dead. Like that kind of thing. So we see that in Judges 13 with Manoah and all that. So you have this figure who is there, and then you have Satan. And Joshua's the high priest, and Joshua's in filthy clothes. And I just love the story because Satan is pointing his finger and he's saying to the Lord, and he's, and the angel of the Lord, and he's saying, this man is dirty. He's filthy. He can't be your high priest. He can't minister to you. And the Lord says to Satan, the Lord rebuke you. The Riello translation, shut up. Shut up in your face. The Lord rebuke you. The Lord has chosen Jerusalem, rebuke you. That's what he says. And then the angel of the Lord summons the court, put a clean turban on his head, put a clean vestment on him, right? And he washes him. What the Lord doesn't say, he hasn't sinned. That's not what he says. He has sinned, but we're going to take care of it. We're going to clean him up. We're going to make him pure, right? We're going to clean him up. We're going to clean up Joshua. And so there's Satan pointing the finger. And in Revelation 12, the same thing. Revelation 12, verse 10. It says that Satan is the accuser of the brethren. So think about that when you think about temptation. It always appears as if it's going to be good. It's good to make one wise. It's appealing to the eyes, right? The first sin. Every sin, says the Catechism. Did you know this? The Catechism says this. That, you know what? While we know the devil is a real enemy and these names give us insight, he's not all that creative. It really is. He's a one-trick pony. Really is. The Catechism actually says that all sin follows the pattern of the original sin. So if you kind of get to the anatomy of the original sin, you can get to the anatomy of your own sins. There's something in play there, right? And then, of course, the way the devil plays it. So Lucifer, he seduces us by making the sin look good, right? It's appealing. You're right to do this. This is actually going to be good for you. The devil, right? He's a divider. So all sin in some sense is going to bring about division. It's going to distort, right? There's a twistedness to it. And then, of course, he's the accuser. So the minute you give in to the sin that you thought was going to bring all this wonderful peace and tranquility, he's there to point your way. What a mess. God doesn't love you. I cannot even believe that you think that you're a Christian, right? We've all kind of experienced that. The most extreme example, Father Donald Calloway, you know him, right?
Oh, yeah, he's great. Surfer Don. So father.
He felt a kind of call of God, right? And he ran away from it. ran away from it. He didn't want anything to do with it. And Father talked about basically let me make such a mess of my life so that God would just leave me the heck alone. Well, he's Father Donald Calloway, right? And so that's the devil trying to do that to us. Make yourself so unusable because God will definitely give up on you. Right? That's not of God. That's of the evil one. So anyway, so that's that. All right. Any thoughts, comments, observations?
The copy I've got of Screwtape Letters here is an annotated copy. So there's lots of really interesting things that it talks about. Here, just side notes and what was going on in the English side of the time of writing. What it says here is that when he wrote in longhand, and he would often destroy the original longhand copies. Well, because this was written during the time of the war, he was worried that a typed copy may be destroyed in one of the air raids or what have you. And so he sends a copy, or he sends the original longhand copy to a nun in a monastery. An Anglican, Sister Penelope, an Anglican nun of the convent of the community of Sister St. Mary of the Virgin of Wantage. After the war, Sister Penelope offered to return the manuscript. Lewis suggested that she sell it, if possible, and put the money to good use. Eventually, she sold it to the Berg Collection in New York Public Library and used the funds to restore the Commons Chapel. But as he was writing the letters and sending them into the Guardian, they were offering to send him £2 per letter, and he didn't take any of the money. He gave it to widows and orphans.
Wow. What a man of faith. Generous. So incredible. So what copy that you have? You have like,
It's an annotated copy. Lots of really great notes in here.
wow, that's fantastic. I'm gonna have to get that. Oh, real quick, before I forget, I was sharing this with people. Scott Hahn's new Ignatius Catholic Study Bible is coming out in the fall. It's worth getting. It's gonna be worth getting. It's gonna be the best Catholic study Bible on the market, bar none. Not even. There will be his study Bible produced by Ignatius with about 20 Catholic scholars, and then everything else will just fall by the wayside. It's going to be that good. You're going to want it. You're going to want a copy of it. So anyway, all right. By the way, anybody ever watch Matt Fradd interviews? Scott Hahn was just on the other day. Watch it. It's really good. It's just so good. I'm a big Scott Hahn fan. So anyway, all right. So confronting the devil's power. This is what I was telling you about. This is from St. Paul VI in 1972. Okay. So this is Paul VI in 1972, confronting the devil's power. This is the title of his Wednesday audience. What are the church's greatest needs at the present time? Don't be surprised at our answer, and don't write it off as simplistic or even superstitious. One of the church's greatest needs is to be defended against the evil we call the devil. Before clarifying what we mean, we would like to invite you to open your minds to the light that faith casts on the vision of human existence, a vision which, from this observation point of faith, reaches out to immense distances and penetrates to unique depths. To tell the truth, the picture that we are invited to behold with an all-encompassing realism is a very, very beautiful one. It is the picture of creation, the work of God. He himself admired its substantial beauty as an external reflection of his wisdom and power. Then he goes on to talk about the dramatic history of mankind and how, in this great battle, air conditioner shut off, and this great battle, we have, redemption unfolds in our salvation. And then he goes on, he talks about the mystery of evil. Okay, so it's talking about the triumph of Jesus's work, his transcendent presence, and so on. But is this vision complete and correct? Are the defects in the world of no account? What of the things that don't work properly in our lives? What of suffering and death, wickedness, cruelty, sin? In a word, what of evil? Don't we see how much evil there is in the world, especially moral evil, which goes against man and against God at one and the same time, although in different ways? Isn't this a sad spectacle, an unexplainable mystery? And aren't we the lovers of the word, the people who sing of the good, we believers? Aren't we the ones who are most sensitive and most upset by our observation and experience of evil? We find evil in the realm of nature, where so many of its expressions seem to speak to us of some sort of disorder. Then we find it among human beings in the form of weakness, frailty, suffering, death, and something worse, the tension between two laws, one reaching for the good, the other toward evil. St. Paul points out this torment in humiliating fashion to prove our need of salvific grace, the salvation brought by Christ. Even before this, a pagan poet had described this conflict within the heart of every man. I see what is better and I approve it, but then I follow the worse. We must come face to face with the sin, which is a perversion of our human freedom and the profound cause of death, because it involves detachment from God. And then sin in its turn becomes the occasion and effect of interference in us and our work by a dark, hostile agent, the devil. Evil is not merely an absence of something, but an active force, a living spiritual being that is perverted and perverts others. It is a terrible reality, mysterious and frightening. Wow. This is Pope Paul VI in 1972. It is a departure from the picture provided by the biblical church teaching to refuse to acknowledge the devil's existence, to regard him as a self-sustaining principle who, unlike other creatures, does not owe his origin to God, or to explain the devil as some pseudo-reality, a conceptual. That's exactly what Deese presents him as in Nefarious, a conceptual, fanciful personification of the unknown causes of our misfortunes. When the problem of evil is seen in all its complexity and in its absurdity from the point of view of our limited minds, it becomes an obsession. It poses the greatest single obstacle to our religious understanding of the universe. It is no accident that St. Augustine was bothered by this for years. I sought the source of evil, and I found no explanation. Anyway, I'll send that in email to you all. It's worth reading to go on and on. But did you catch that? How it is a betrayal of biblical church teaching not to acknowledge his existence. And think about this. How many bishops have refused to do exorcisms or who are afraid to do exorcisms because they have no background in demonology? Father Gabriel Amorth was the chief exorcist of the Diocese of Rome, John Paul's man. And he tells the story of how many bishops would call him and say, "We are in problems. I need an exorcist." And Father would say to him, "You don't need an exorcist. You are an exorcist." And they would say things like, "Oh, I don't want to mess with that." Right? And so one of the things that we have to face is that for many, many years, people downplayed the reality of the evil one. And we probably could all tell stories where people, kind of dismissed it. Well, it's psychological hallucinations. Even people with Jesus in the wilderness, right? We've heard people try to say, "Oh, Jesus was just, he was deprived of food and drink and sleep, and so he just hallucinated the devil." Okay, that's not what Matthew says, right? So anyway, keep that in mind as we go through. I printed up. There's multiple PDF files of the Screwtape Letters, and when I pull up, I'll pull up the version of it because it's really easy. If like we're ever talking about a word and you say, "Oh, what word?" you could find it with Control F very easily, which is worth it. So, any thoughts, comments? We'll close. We'll close. We'll finish up about 8:00 each week. It's a good time. 8:05. Yes.
I was wondering, I don't even know if we can look something like this up, but I know when books come out, like, Harry Potter and Twilight and all these crazy books, everybody's like so interested, they look up the occult, they look up things, Dungeons and Dragons, they start looking into that, and you can see books are getting borrowed from, of other things that pertain. I'm curious to know, after these letters were written, if people started to look into more like the devil or angels and God, like if it opened people's minds up to think, is there really a devil? And, because I mean, he was obviously taught that there was a devil, even though not everybody always talks about him in church. Obviously, he believes in the existence of devils.
Well, I mean, that's just traditional Christianity, even Judaism. You cannot.
Do you think it's been played down over the years, since the decades, just less and less belief in the devil, and that's why some people are like,
Yeah, definitely. I think if you talk to most priests, they will tell you they hardly ever talked about exorcism in seminary or the reality of the devil as a force. If you go back to the 70s and stuff, that's changed a lot now. That's changed. The rise of exorcists in the United States has gone through the roof, which is a good and bad problem. And it's good because we need them. It's bad for the reasons that we need them. But yeah, Chuck, you were saying.
Yeah, well, if you go back a couple centuries, even further back in the 20th century, I mean, prominence of the workings of the devil within the church was a reality that they all openly talked about. If you read some of the accounts of, especially through the Dark Ages, and just before the Renaissance period, look at Michelangelo's painting in the Sistine Chapel. Where he gets the forces of the darkness is fighting, the forces of good, and it encompasses all that, in his works. And but again, we'll get into this more, I'm pretty sure. But we said for years that the devil's primary play is to prove to people he doesn't even exist.
Right, that's what he wants.
That's his primary, mode of operation.
That's his goal.
If he can convince people, I'm just a fantasy, someone in the church, really, I'm not really bad like they say I am, and non-existent. Then
that's when he can do his most work.
Damage. That's when he does his most work. Yeah.
Right. Right.
I would say no. I would say it was just the opposite. I would say once this came in, it has declined a lot. The knowledge and the open discussion of the devil. You very rarely hear in homilies. Now you hear it a lot in Protestant church. I used to hear it a lot when I was a Protestant about the workings of the devil, and now and that the cautions that we should take, precautions that we should take in terms of our own spiritual health and our walk, as opposed to the Catholic Church, which doesn't preach about it very much anymore.
Right.
I have heard very few homilies, right, unless I search them out on YouTube or online in masses where they actually talk about the devil.
One of the things I love and appreciate so much is the return of that St. Michael prayer, because that's a constant reminder at every Mass that we are up against a great enemy. And my favorite line in there is that we're not invoking Michael per se, is that by the power of God, cast into hell. Not Michael's not going to cast into hell, but Michael's going to do God's work and his plan, and it's going to be God through Michael. And always that reminder that we are in a spiritual battle, so. All right.
I love that story about Jacob when the angel he was battling the demon. Remember what I said? Just to get to him, and to answer his prayer. I love that story where they say he did battle with his demon all the way before he came to answer the prayer of Jacob.
Right. Yeah. Daniel, the book of Daniel. So. All right, we will close in prayer. And hey, why don't we pray the St. Michael's prayer, being that we're going to read this. And so we'll read letters 1 and 2. So, and then we'll be I'm kidding. Essay exam. No, I'm kidding. And then we'll use our study questions, which will be wonderful. And then we'll just kind of make our observations and things that kind of stuck out at us. So, all right. Why don't we go to the Lord in prayer? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Saint Michael, the archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. And of course, that story of the St. Michael prayer comes out of Leo the 13th, having said Mass. And he has this vision. And then and the prayer that we pray is much smaller than you actually can find, like the St. Michael prayer online, like the original version put together by Leo the 13th. But yeah, so very powerful, very powerful. And Maximilian Kolbe tells a story of when he was in Rome in 1917. He what led him to say be possessed totally by God and by Mary was you had the enemies of the church were seeking to be possessed so much by the devil that they were giving themselves over in these consecrations to the devil. And so he had heard about that, and that motivated him to say, well, if they're willing to do that for the evil one, I want to do that for the Lord. So anyway.
We have some people that can't come to the, class, this book club, but they want to participate and they were watching and they requested that you add them to their email and a copy.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's what I will do.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if you have my email.
Do you want to pass out something to get emails or?